Not very many times I get to say I told you so, but I told you so. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the second episode of DizBiz, the series where I talk about Disney more from a company perspective and a business perspective than from a creative or fan perspective. And I had to throw this episode together this week because some big news dropped that sort of caught me off guard, even though I kind of saw it coming in the long term. And that is the news coming out of Disney's quarterly earnings report that confirms that they will be stopping all video game development. They will be ending Disney Infinity, and they will, from now on, just start licensing out their property to other video game publishers to create games based on all of the properties they own. Obviously, I think there are two main talking points here to talk about. The first being that Disney Infinity is kaput. You know, the 3.0 was the latest one that came out. They had already announced earlier this year that they weren't going to be making a 4.0. They weren't going to be at E3, but now we're learning that 3.0 will be the last Disney Infinity. I believe there's one or two more play sets scheduled for this year, and then that's it. They're not going to be supporting it anymore. In fact, that means over 300 jobs are going to be lost over at Avalanche, who are the creators of Disney Infinity. I mean, it doesn't feel good to rub it in and say, I told you so, but I feel like this was something that was very easily predictable. When Disney Infinity 2.0 and 3.0 later were announced, had sort of voiced my disapproval of how they were going about this. I thought they were making a big mistake. You know, this was a game that they were sort of touting as a platform, and so to create like annual starter kits that you had to buy into to keep investing in Disney Infinity was just, you know, to be quite frank, the dumbest idea they could have gone with, because all that does is force parents who frankly are probably, you know, doing most of the purchasing of this stuff. It forces them to every year sort of revisit and question if they should be investing in this platform. And when a starter pack's like $70 and, you know, from parents' perspective, there's nothing really new or worth getting in there, it leads to people not buying it so much. And I think it was, a decision made out of greed. I think they looked at Skylanders, which also has an annual release schedule, and they thought they could grab some of that. The difference, though, is Skylanders is a series in which each game is sort of unique in its own way and is its own standalone game, right? You know, if you play Disney Infinity, you know that it's not a game in its own right. It is a platform to launch into games. It is a sandbox to build your own little mini games, but it's not its own game, right? Those are the play sets that go for like $20 to $30, and asking for people to pay for that and asking people to pay for new annual versions of this platform just ended up being too much. You know, if they want to do it the right way, Disney Infinity, there would have been one release. It would have cost, you know, whatever, $40, $60, and that's it. You know, when you upgrade the toy box, upgrade it for free and just keep selling those play sets. But I don't want to go on too long about that. I mean, it's unfortunate. I really liked a lot of the figures. I collected a lot of them even when I didn't have plans to play the game. And it just didn't perform the way they expected, and I think it was a big catalyst in them getting out of the video game industry. And it's tough to talk about because on one hand, it's really disappointing, and I'll get into that in a minute, but on the other hand, it's actually not a bad business decision. You know, it is a very expensive industry to be in, and Disney as a company, even though they've been seeing growth quarter over quarter in all of their business units or, you know, divisions or however you want to label them, the one where you've been seeing consistent drop-off has been in their interactive division, which is their video games. And for whatever reason, whether it's the leadership all the way at the top with Iger or the leadership of that division, they just don't seem to be doing well with video games. And, you know, I can understand from a business perspective, they can see that they can just step out of that altogether. They could, you know, cut all of those losses. They can still license the properties. So like we see with EA creating Star Wars Battlefront, or, you know, they could probably get Marvel properties out to other developers. You know, you move that risk of developing a video game over onto the publisher, and then you just collect a little less through your licensing fees, and it just becomes a safer space. Now, that said, for as decent of a business decision as it might have been, it's really disappointing because it pretty much is, I think, in all of Iger's tenure, it's probably the most un-Disney-like move they could have made. You know, think for a second about the history of Disney. You know, going all the way back to Walt and Roy, this was a company that sort of built its roots into the ground on this idea that they were going to do things their way because it's the Disney way, and it reaches for a higher quality that others can't match. And that's going to create a product that people are going to love, and it's going to last a long time, and that's going to, generate return customers, whether it's through the parks or the movies, and it's going to be a good long-term business decision. And you saw Walt doing that when, he finally decided he was going to own Mickey Mouse after losing Oswald, and, getting into film, making sure he owned everything that he was doing. You also see it after the Walt and Roy era. You would think Eisner sort of stepping in and Disney being a public company at that point, that's where it would drop off, but it didn't. Eisner, when they were initially planning to expand the Disney parks, were planning to partner with a whole bunch of different hotel chains to build hotels in Walt Disney World and part of their expansion. And it was really quick that Eisner realized that none of these chains were going to be able to do things the Disney way, and that they'd be better off just doing it themselves. And that's what they ended up doing. Back when Eisner took over, there was sort of this underlying fear that Imagineering was going to be shut down and then sort of shipped off and outsourced to these other engineering and design firms. But again, Eisner realized that Disney could do it in a way that none of these other companies could. And even moving into the Iger era now, he had a very different way of, and still does have a very different way of running this company. Whereas Eisner was all about doing things cheap and making small, modest successes that build up and, become a major success. Iger's all about spending big bucks for super popular products and then making sure the quality stays up to par. And that's what they've done. Pixar with Marvel, now with Star Wars, every time he's purchased some sort of big property, the quality has stayed really high, and they've sort of not created something the Disney way on their own, but, sort of adopted something and made sure it fit within the Disney way. And so that's why if I had read this week that Disney purchased, a big name video game publisher like an EA or a Ubisoft, I wouldn't have been surprised. It would have lined up exactly with what they're doing with film right now, and it would have been great. If the news came out that they were going to redouble their efforts and double their investment in building a really great AAA development studio and publishing arm, I wouldn't have been surprised, because it lines up with the way they treat their theme parks. But instead, we're getting news that they're just giving up and they're just going to sell the licenses out to all these different companies. And it's just really disappointing, because Disney owns a lot of really valuable companies and a lot of really valuable properties, I should say. And, that's great for the video game industry. Marvel video games, Indiana Jones, Star Wars. There's so many great video games. And I think Disney at its core has what it takes to create a really strong video game publisher and a bunch of really strong video game developers. But time after time, under Iger and a little bit under Eisner, they've just dropped the ball. Split Second was a Disney published game. It didn't do that well. They shut down the developers. Epic Mickey 2 didn't do that well. It was shut down. Disney Infinity now is not meeting expectations, and they're shutting it down. And, they're going the safe route when that's not what Disney's used to doing. And I think Iger's doing this because it might look good in the short term for their the shareholders, and then, in their stock prices. But I think in the long term, it's going to come back and bite them. We just got news this week as well that EA is working on a new version of Star Wars Battlefront coming out this year, despite the fact that there was a lot of criticism lended out to Battlefront that came out last fall, and it sort of seems like they're already rushing out games. And this is ultimately what you get when you just license out the properties to the lowest bidder. And so, as unfortunate as it is to say, as much as I predicted that Disney Infinity was not going to last very long in its model, I think we have a future in store for us where you start to see a lot of Disney-based games get rushed out and not meet the level of quality that I think people come to expect when it comes to Disney stuff. Anyway, I had to talk about this because it was pretty big news. I mean, video games, Disney, it's sort of like the perfect cross of everybody who watches this channel. Let me know what you think in the comments below, whether you think this is a good idea or a bad idea. Maybe you just don't care at all. Maybe you're really sad that Disney Infinity's gone, or maybe, you never bought into it in the first place. I'd love to hear what you have to say. If you have any other business-related topics about Disney that you'd like me to talk about in a future episode of DizBiz, feel free to also leave that in the comments below, or you can let me know on Twitter. I'm at RobPlays. I want to thank you all for watching. If you want to see more Disney videos, or if you want to see some video game videos, all you have to do is hit that subscribe button. Have a great week. Whatever you're doing, make the most of it. I'll see you next time for the next episode of DizBiz. Bye, everybody.
So, my number 3 is in Disneyland. And it is the cars in, how do you say the ride? I want to say it the way Rob says the ride.
Rady Racers?
Rady Racers.
Rady Racers.